They said she was nothing without him. Gavin Mercer stood in the center of the courtroom, adjusting his silk tie, laughing at the woman who had supported him for 10 years. He called her a parasite. He told the judge she didn't deserve a dime of his fortune. He thought he had won the ultimate victory by leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back. But Gavin made one fatal mistake. He didn't look out the window. He didn't see who was waiting at the curb on 4th Avenue. When the courtroom door swung open and the city's most reclusive billionaire stepped out of a phantom Rolls-Royce to hold the door for his discarded wife, Gavin's laughter died instantly. This isn't just a divorce story. This is a reckoning. The fluorescent lights of the family court in downtown Seattle hummed with a sound that Elena Vance felt in her teeth. It was a low, electric buzz, like a fly trapped against a window pane, desperate and annoying. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the scuff marks on the cheap laminate table. Her lawyer, a court-appointed representative named Sarah Jenkins, who looked as exhausted as Elena felt, was shuffling through papers that seemed thinner than napkins. On the other side of the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of expensive cologne. Santal 33, to be precise. That was Gavin's scent. It was the smell of the life Elena was about to lose forever. Gavin Mercer leaned back in his leather chair, whispering something to his attorney, Richard Sterling. Sterling was the kind of lawyer whose billboards dominated the I-5 highway, the kind who charged $600 an hour just to read an email. They were both chuckling. It wasn't a loud laugh, just a smug, vibrating rumble that carried across the quiet room. "Order," Judge Harrison said, though he didn't look up from his file. He was a man who had seen too many divorces to care about the emotional undercurrents of this one. To him, it was just math. Assets minus liabilities equals resolution. "Your Honor," Sterling stood up, buttoning his charcoal suit jacket. "My client, Mr. Mercer, has been more than generous. We have offered Ms. Vance the 2018 Honda Civic and a cash settlement of $5,000. Considering she has not contributed financially to the household in 7 years, we believe this is charitable." Elena flinched. Charitable. 7 years ago, Gavin had begged her to quit her job as a paralegal at a boutique firm in Bellevue. He had just landed the contract for the Mercer Logistics expansion, and he wanted a wife who could manage the home, host the dinners for potential investors, and manage his mother's declining health. Elena had done it all. She had wiped his mother's chin when the strokes got bad. She had cooked 5-course meals for investors who barely looked her in the eye. She had managed the contractors who built the dream house she was now being kicked out of. "Objection," Sarah Jenkins said, though her voice lacked fire. Miss Vance contributed significantly to the marital assets through unpaid domestic labor and the care of Mr. Mercer's late mother. That labor allowed Mr. Mercer to build his business without distraction. Gavin scoffed audibly. He turned his head, locking eyes with Eleanor. His eyes, once the warm hazel she had fallen in love with at a coffee shop in Pioneer Square, were now cold and hard like polished stones. "Domestic labor," Gavin said, ignoring his lawyer's gesture to stay quiet. "She sat at home, Your Honor. She spent my money on yoga classes and organic groceries while I was out there grinding, working 18-hour days to build an empire. And now she wants half? It's delusional." "Mr. Mercer, address the bench, not the plaintiff," Judge Harrison warned, though he didn't sound particularly angry. "Apologies, Your Honor," Gavin said, his tone dripping with false humility. It's frustrating. I built Mercer Logistics from the ground up. I'm the one who took the risks. I'm the one who secured the deal with the Port Authority. Elena." She just enjoyed the view. Elena felt the tears prickling, hot and sharp, behind her eyelids. She dug her fingernails into her palms. Don't cry, she told herself. Do not give him the satisfaction of seeing you break. She remembered the nights he came home crying from stress, terrified he would lose the business in the early days. She remembered holding him on the bathroom floor at 3:00 a.m. when the panic attacks hit. She had been his rock. Now he was treating her like a stumbling block he couldn't wait to kick aside. The law in Washington is clear regarding community property, Sarah Jenkins tried again, regardless of direct financial contribution. The prenuptial agreement is also clear, Sterling interrupted smoothly, sliding a document across the table toward the judge. Signed 10 years ago, it states explicitly that any assets acquired by the primary earner remain the sole property of that earner in the event of a dissolution of marriage. Elena froze. The prenup. She had signed it the week before the wedding, blinded by love and trusting Gavin when he said it was just a formality my dad insisted on. She hadn't even read it properly. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, flipping to the back page. The room went silent. The only sound was the scratching of the stenographer's machine and the heavy thud of Eleanor's heart against her ribs. The signature appears valid, the judge muttered. Gavin turned to Eleanor again, a small, cruel smile playing on his lips. He mouthed one word. Goodbye. The gavel didn't bang. It just tapped, a dull wooden sound that signaled the end of Eleanor's life as she knew it. The court upholds the prenuptial agreement, Judge Harrison ruled, closing the file. Mr. Mercer will retain the property on Highland Drive, the Mercer Logistics shares, and the primary investment accounts. Ms. Vance is awarded the vehicle requested and a transitional support payment of $10,000 adjusted from the proposed $5,000. Case closed. $10,000. That wouldn't even cover the deposit and first month's rent on a decent apartment in Seattle. Gavin stood up immediately, shaking hands with Sterling. He looked like a man who had just won the Super Bowl. He didn't even glance at Elena as he began packing his briefcase. Elena felt numb. She stood up on shaky legs, her cheap blazer feeling too tight across her shoulders. She grabbed her purse, a scuffed leather bag that had seen better days, and turned to leave. She just wanted to get to the elevator. She just wanted to breathe. "Elena, wait up!" Gavin's voice called out as she reached the heavy oak doors. She stopped but didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to look at him. He walked around her, blocking her path. He was beaming. "Look. No hard feelings, right? It's just business. You know how it is." "It wasn't business, Gavin," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It was a marriage." "Same thing." He laughed, checking his Rolex. "Hey, I'm feeling generous today. Since I won, I'm in a good mood. If you need a reference for a job application, maybe a receptionist gig or cleaning houses, let me know. I'll put in a good word. You were always good at cleaning up messes." The cruelty of it took her breath away. He wasn't just leaving her. He was trying to erase her dignity. "Get out of my way," she said, her voice gaining a fraction of steel. "Touchy," Gavin sneered. "You should be thanking me. I carried you for a decade. Now you get to see what the real world is like. Good luck, Elena. You're going to need it. Without me, you're just nobody." He pushed past her, shouldering the doors open with a swagger that made Elena's stomach turn. He walked out into the hallway, his lawyer trailing behind him, laughing at some joke Gavin had just cracked. Elena stood there for a moment, taking deep breaths. In, out, in, out. She couldn't collapse here, not in the courthouse. She fixed her hair, straightened her jacket, and walked out. As she navigated the security checkpoint and exited the building, the grey Seattle sky greeted her with a light drizzle. It was fitting. She walked down the concrete steps, clutching the strap of her bag. Gavin was standing on the sidewalk near the pickup zone, twirling his keys. He was waiting for his valet-parked Porsche. He saw her coming down the stairs and decided he wasn't done yet. He wanted an audience. "Hey, everyone!" Gavin shouted, loud enough for a group of paralegals smoking nearby to hear. "See that woman? That's what a gold digger looks like when she strikes out. Back to the trailer park, honey." A few people turned to look. Elena's face burned with humiliation. She kept her head down, walking toward the corner where she would have to catch a bus because Gavin had the keys to the Civic and hadn't given them to her yet. "Where's your ride?" Gavin mocked, leaning against a lamppost. "Oh, wait. That's right. You can't afford one. Tell you what, I'll give you $20 for cab fare. Consider it alimony." He actually reached into his wallet, pulled out a $20 bill, and flicked it at her. It fluttered through the damp air and landed in a puddle near her boot. Elena stopped. She looked at the wet bill. She looked at Gavin's sneering face. The anger that had been simmering in her gut finally boiled over, but it didn't come out as a scream. It came out as a strange, cold calm. "Keep your money, Gavin," she said, her voice cutting through the traffic noise. "You're going to need it when your luck runs out." "My luck?" Gavin threw his head back and laughed. "I'm the king of Seattle logistics, sweetheart. My luck doesn't run out. Look at me, and look at you." He spread his arms wide, gesturing to his suit, his watch, his looming success. And that was when the hum began. It was a low, powerful purr of an engine that sounded nothing like the cabs and sedans idling at the curb. It was a sound that commanded attention. The traffic on 4th Avenue seemed to part. Around the corner, a car appeared. It wasn't just a car. It was a rolling fortress of wealth. A Rolls-Royce Phantom, painted a deep, midnight black with chrome rims that caught the flat grey light. It moved with a silent, predatory grace, gliding towards the courthouse entrance. Gavin's jaw went slack. He was a car guy. He knew exactly what that was. That was a $500,000 vehicle. "Whoa," Gavin muttered, momentarily distracted from his bullying. "Check that out. That's probably the mayor, or maybe Bezos." The massive car slowed down. It didn't pull up to the VIP entrance. It didn't pull up to the lawyer's valet. It pulled up directly in front of Eleanor. Gavin frowned. "Hey, you're blocking the loading zone. Move it!" he yelled at the driver, assuming it was a mistake. The car didn't move. Instead, the driver's side door didn't open. The rear passenger door opened. A man stepped out. The silence that fell over the sidewalk was absolute. The man was tall, wearing a bespoke navy suit that made Gavin's expensive tailoring look like a costume. He had dark hair silvering at the temples, broad shoulders, and an air of authority that felt heavier than gravity. Gavin froze. He recognized the face from the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. It was Julian Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Global, the man who owned half the shipping lanes in the Pacific Northwest, a man whose net worth made Gavin's empire look like a lemonade stand. Gavin's mind raced. What is Julian Blackwood doing here? Is he here for me? Did he hear about the logistics deal? Gavin puffed out his chest, preparing to introduce himself, but Julian Blackwood didn't even look at Gavin. He walked around the back of the car, his expensive Italian shoes clicking on the pavement. He walked straight up to Eleanor, who was standing there with rain dampening her hair. And then, the impossible happened. Julian Blackwood, the billionaire known for his icy demeanor and ruthlessness in the boardroom, stopped in front of Eleanor. His expression softened, melting into something that looked painfully like adoration. He reached out and gently took the heavy, scuffed bag from her shoulder. "I'm sorry I'm late," Julian said, his voice deep and warm, completely ignoring the stunned crowd. "The board meeting ran long. I told them my priority was elsewhere." Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You came," she whispered, as if she hadn't believed he would. "I will always come for you, Elle," he said. Julian turned and opened the rear door of the Rolls-Royce for her, shielding her head from the rain with his hand, a gesture of pure, old-world chivalry. Gavin stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. His brain couldn't process the data. Elena and Julian Blackwood? "Wait," Gavin croaked, stepping forward involuntarily. "Hold on, you know her." Julian paused. He had one hand on the car door, about to close it. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning Gavin from head to toe. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of absolute insignificance. It was the way a lion looks at a cockroach. "I'm sorry," Julian said smoothly. "Do I know you?" "I'm Gavin Mercer. I own Mercer Logistics. I'm her ex-husband," Gavin stammered, pointing at Elena inside the plush leather interior. She's nobody. She's broke. I just divorced her." Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. He looked at the $20 bill still floating in the puddle. Then he looked back at Gavin. "Mr. Mercer," Julian said, his voice dropping an octave, deadly quiet. "You didn't just divorce a nobody. You just released the only thing that was keeping your mediocre company afloat. And as for broke..." Julian reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a handkerchief, and wiped a speck of rain off his lapel. "She's with me now, which means she has more power in her little finger than you have in your entire existence." Julian slammed the car door shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. He walked around to the other side, got in, and the Rolls-Royce pulled away, leaving Gavin standing alone in the rain, the $20 bill soaking into the mud at his feet. The interior of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was a world away from the gritty grey dampness of the Seattle sidewalk. It was a capsule of silence, scented faintly of aged leather and cedarwood. As the car merged seamlessly into the traffic of 4th Avenue, Elena Vance slumped back against the seat, her body trembling with the aftershocks of adrenaline. She clutched her scuffed handbag to her chest like a shield. Beside her, Julian Blackwood didn't speak immediately. He didn't encroach on her space. He simply reached into a compartment, cooled to a precise temperature, withdrew a bottle of sparkling water, cracked the seal, and placed it in the holder next to her. "Drink," he said softly. "The adrenaline crash is coming. You need to hydrate." Elena stared at the bubbles rising in the glass bottle. She looked at Julian, really looked at him, for the first time since he had appeared like an apparition on the curb. Up close, he was even more intimidating than he appeared in the magazines. His jaw was sharp, his eyes a piercing steel grey that seemed to see right through her defences. But there was no judgment in them, only a profound, simmering anger that she knew wasn't directed at her. "Julian," she breathed, her voice raspy. What was that? You can't just pick me up in front of the court. Gavin, the lawyers, everyone saw." "That was the point, Elena," Julian replied, his voice calm and rhythmic, like a deep ocean tide. "Men like Gavin Mercer thrive on isolation. He wanted you to feel small. He wanted you to walk to a bus stop in the rain while he drove away in a warm car. I simply corrected the imbalance." Elena took a sip of the water. It was cold and sharp. He thinks I'm a gold digger now. He called you my sugar daddy." Julian let out a dry, humourless chuckle. He turned to look out the tinted window as the city skyline blurred past. Let him think what he wants. Gavin is a man who looks at the world through a keyhole. He sees only what he wants to see. He doesn't know who you really are, Elena. He never did. Elena looked down at her hands that were rough from scrubbing floors, from gardening, from years of physical labour that Gavin had deemed women's work. "And who am I?" she asked quietly. "Because back there, the judge said I was a dependent, a burden. I have $10,000 to my name, Julian. I'm 32 years old, and I have nothing to show for a decade of my life except a used Honda and a broken heart." Julian turned back to her. His expression intensified. "You are the woman who sat in the palliative care ward of Swedish Medical Center for 6 months straight," Julian said, his voice firm. "You are the woman who read Great Expectations aloud to a dying woman who didn't even know your name half the time because her son, her only son, was too busy closing deals to visit her." Elena froze. The memory washed over her. 2 years ago, Gavin's mother, Martha, had been dying of aggressive cancer. Gavin had visited maybe 3 times in 6 months. He claimed the stress of the business was too much, that he couldn't bear to see her like that. So Elena had gone. Every single day. She had wiped Martha's brow, held her hand through the seizures, and fed her ice chips. "You saw that?" Elena whispered. "My father was in the room next door," Julian revealed. "He was in a coma. I was there every evening, sitting in the dark. The walls were thin. I heard you, Elena. I heard the way you spoke to her. I heard you defending Gavin when she asked where he was, making up excuses for him so a dying mother wouldn't feel abandoned. I saw you in the cafeteria, crying into your coffee, and then pulling yourself together to go back in and smile for her." Elena felt a tear slide down her cheek. She hadn't known anyone was watching. She thought she was invisible. "I did some research," Julian admitted, shifting slightly so he faced her more fully. "I wanted to know who this saint was. I found out you were married to Gavin Mercer. I knew Gavin by reputation, a shark, a man who cuts corners, a man who treats contracts like suggestions. I couldn't understand how a man like that deserved a woman like you. I loved him," Elena said, though the words tasted like ash now. "I know," Julian said. "I respected that. I stayed away. I watched from a distance because you were a married woman, and I have a code. But when I heard he filed for divorce, when I heard the terms he was offering, when I heard he was trying to leave you destitute after you gave him the best years of your life." Julian's hand clenched into a fist on his knee. The leather of his gloves creaked. I decided that silence was no longer an option. The car began to slow down. They weren't heading toward the city center. They were crossing the bridge toward Medina, the enclave of the ultra-wealthy. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, panic fluttering in her chest again. I can't go to a hotel, Julian. I can't afford it, and I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Julian corrected her. "And we aren't going to a hotel. We are going to my home. You need a sanctuary, Elena. You need a place where no process servers can reach you, where Gavin can't harass you, and where you can figure out what you want to do next. The East Wing is yours. You won't even see me if you don't want to." "Why?" she asked, searching his face. "Why do this for me?" Julian looked at her for a long moment, his guard dropping just an inch. "Because," he said softly, "when my father finally died, I was alone in that room. You were the only one who stopped in the hallway to ask if I was okay. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know I was a billionaire. You just saw a man in pain and offered him a tissue. I never forgot that." Elena remembered. A tall man in a dark suit, sobbing silently by the vending machines. She had given him a pack of tissues and bought him a coffee. It was a 5-minute interaction. "That was you," she whispered. "That was me." Julian nodded. The car turned through a massive iron gate that swung open automatically. They drove up a winding driveway, lined with ancient cedar trees. At the top of the hill stood a house that looked more like a modern art museum than a residence. Glass, steel, and stone, cantilevered over the edge of a cliff with a panoramic view of Lake Washington. "Welcome to the fortress," Julian said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "Gavin Mercer can shout all he wants. He can't hear you up here." As the car came to a stop, Elena looked out at the sprawling estate. For the first time in months, the crushing weight on her chest lightened. She wasn't just safe. She was valued. And for a woman who had been told she was worthless for so long, that was the most dangerous weapon she could have been given. While Elena was being ushered into a world of quiet luxury, Gavin Mercer was loudly celebrating his freedom in the noisy, red leather booth of the Butcher's Table, a high-end steakhouse in downtown Seattle. He had ordered the Wagyu tomahawk steak and a bottle of Screaming Eagle Cabernet, a wine that cost more than the settlement check he had just written for Eleanor. Across from him sat two men. First was Richard Sterling, his lawyer, who was busy calculating his billable hours on a napkin. Second was Marcus Thorne, Gavin's VP of sales, a man with slippery eyes and a laugh that sounded like a bark. "To freedom!" Gavin roared, raising his glass. "And to bulletproof prenups!" "Here, here," Sterling chuckled, clinking his glass against Gavin's. "I told you, Gavin, the ironclad approach always wins." She didn't stand a chance. The look on her face when the judge ruled? Priceless. She looked like a kicked puppy. Gavin laughed, slicing into the rare meat. God, it was pathetic. "But I contributed to the household." He mimicked Elena's voice in a high, whining falsetto. "Give me a break. I'm out there closing million-dollar contracts, and she thinks doing laundry is a job." Marcus Thorne laughed, but it was a bit nervous. He took a long swig of wine. "Hey, Gavin, I gotta ask, though. What was the deal with the car outside? The rolls?" Gavin waved his fork dismissively. "Ah, forget it. Some rich geezer probably mistook her for an escort, or maybe she's been seeing someone on the side. Who cares? She's someone else's problem now. If some old guy wants to pay for her baggage, let him." "It wasn't just some old guy, Gavin," Marcus said, looking down at his phone. "I just saw a tweet. Someone snapped a pic outside the courthouse. They're saying it was Julian Blackwood." The air at the table went still. Gavin paused, a piece of steak halfway to his mouth. He frowned. "Blackwood? Don't be stupid. Julian Blackwood operates in the stratosphere. He doesn't pick up divorced housewives in downtown Seattle. He's probably in Tokyo or London." "I don't know, man." Marcus turned his phone around. The photo was grainy, taken from a distance, but the profile was unmistakable. The silver-touched hair, the sharp suit, and the car, the license plate was visible. BLKWD1. Gavin stared at the screen. A cold knot formed in his stomach, right beneath the expensive wine. "That's impossible," Gavin muttered. "How would Elena know Julian Blackwood? She's boring. She buys coupons. She watches cooking shows." "Maybe she had a life you didn't know about," Sterling suggested, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "If she's involved with Blackwood, Gavin, that could be complicated. Blackwood isn't just rich. He's powerful. He sits on the board of the Port Authority. He owns the shipping terminals we use for the logistics distribution." Gavin slammed his fork down. The noise made a waiter jump. "So what?" Gavin snapped, his face flushing red. "So she banged a billionaire. Good for her. It doesn't change anything. I own Mercer Logistics. I have the contracts locked in. Blackwood is a businessman. He's not going to tank a profitable supply chain just because he's sleeping with my ex-wife. That's bad business." "I hope you're right," Marcus said, loosening his tie. Because we have the renewal with the port coming up next month. If Blackwood decides to squeeze us—" "He won't," Gavin insisted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Now stop killing the vibe. We're celebrating. I'm single, I'm rich, and I've got a date with Tiffany tonight. You guys remember Tiffany, the swimsuit model?" As if on cue, Gavin's phone buzzed on the table. It was a call from his office. "See?" Gavin smirked. Probably another order coming in. Money never sleeps. He picked up the phone. Mercer speaking. "What's the good news?" The voice on the other end was his secretary, Linda. She sounded breathless, panicked. "Mr. Mercer, I don't know how to tell you this." "Spit it out, Linda," Gavin snapped. "We just got an email from the Western Distribution Hub, the ones who handle 60% of our freight." "Yeah? Did they confirm the rate hike?" "No, sir," Linda stammered. They terminated the contract, effective immediately." Gavin froze. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. "What? They can't do that. We have a 3-year agreement. There's a cancellation clause." "They invoked the reputational risk clause, sir. They said they are realigning their partnerships with companies that align with their moral and ethical standards." "Moral and ethical standards?" Gavin shouted, standing up. "What the hell does that mean?" "And sir," Linda's voice dropped to a whisper, "we just got a notification from the bank. Our line of credit for the new warehouse expansion? It's been frozen, pending a compliance review." Gavin stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, his face draining of colour. He looked at Marcus and Sterling, who were watching him with wide eyes. "Who?" Gavin whispered into the phone. "Who owns the Western Distribution Hub? I thought it was a shell company." "I looked it up, sir," Linda said. "It was acquired this morning by Blackwood Global." Gavin lowered the phone slowly. He looked at the half-eaten steak, the expensive wine, the laughing faces of the other patrons. "He bought it," Gavin whispered to the empty air. "He bought the damn distribution hub." "What is it?" Sterling asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Gavin, what's wrong?" Gavin looked at his lawyer, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. He didn't just pick her up, Gavin realized, his voice trembling. "He's coming for me." Just then, his phone buzzed again. A text message, an unknown number. Gavin opened it with shaking fingers. It was a picture, a photo taken from a balcony, looking out over a stunning, sun-drenched lake view. In the foreground, holding a glass of vintage champagne, was Elena's hand. He recognized the small scar on her thumb from a kitchen accident years ago. The caption below the photo was simple, just 3 words. "She likes the view." Gavin dropped the phone into his steak sauce. The first 3 days at the Blackwood estate, which the staff simply called the Summit, passed in a blur of restorative silence. For the first time in 10 years, Elena wasn't waking up to a to-do list that involved dry cleaning, scheduling Gavin's dentist appointments, or managing the temper tantrums of a grown man. She woke up to the sound of rain on glass and the smell of freshly ground coffee that she didn't have to make. But by the 4th day, the novelty of idleness began to wear off. Elena wasn't a woman who enjoyed doing nothing. She had only been forced into submission by a husband who demanded it. Her mind, sharp and analytical, began to wake up. She found Julian in his library on Saturday morning. It was a cavernous room filled with law books, maritime charts, and the soft glow of computer screens. Julian was on a call, speaking rapid-fire Japanese. He looked up when she entered, his eyes brightening, and motioned for her to sit. When he hung up, he didn't ask if she slept well. He treated her like an equal. "The acquisition of the Western Distribution Hub is complete," Julian said, leaning back in his chair. "Gavin is currently scrambling to find a new route for his freight. He's trying to route through Portland, but that adds 6 hours to his delivery times. He'll trigger late penalties on 40% of his contracts. Elena sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her hands clasped. He won't route through Portland, she said quietly. Julian raised an eyebrow. Why not? It's his only legal option. Because Gavin doesn't care about legal options when he's desperate, Elena said, her voice gaining strength. He has a silent partnership with a trucking firm in Tacoma called Red Line Transport. They run overweight loads at night to bypass the way stations. He keeps them off the main books under consulting fees. If you block Portland, he'll use Red Line to move the cargo illegally to undercut the delay. Julian went very still. He turned his chair fully toward her. Red Line Transport. That's a shell company known for safety violations. I know, Elena nodded. I used to reconcile his bank statements, remember? He told me it was just creative accounting to save the business in the early days. But he never stopped doing it. He saves about 15% on overhead by using them. Julian looked at her with a mixture of admiration and intensity. He realized then that he hadn't just rescued a damsel in distress. He had rescued the keeper of Gavin Mercer's secrets. Elena wasn't just a discarded wife. She was a walking vault of incriminating evidence. Elena, Julian said slowly, leaning forward. Do you know where he keeps the invoices for Red Line? He keeps them in a physical file, she said. He doesn't trust the cloud. It's in a safe deposit box at the First National Bank on Fifth Avenue. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of his desk in his home office. He thinks it's clever. He calls it his insurance policy. Julian smiled, but it was a cold, predatory smile. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Get me legal, he said into the receiver. And get me a private investigator who specializes in forensic accounting. We have a lead on the Mercer logistics audit. He hung up and looked at Elena. You just saved me 3 weeks of corporate espionage work. I didn't do it for you, Elena said, her eyes flashing. I did it because he called me a parasite. Parasites take, Julian. I'm proving that I was the one giving him credibility all along. Meanwhile, across the water, in the glass-walled office of Mercer Logistics, Gavin was sweating through his second shirt of the day. The office was in chaos. Phones were ringing off the hook. Mr. Mercer, Linda, his frazzled secretary, burst into his office. The union rep is on line 1. He says the warehouse staff at the south sector are walking out. Walking out? Gavin screamed, slamming his fist on the desk. Why? I pay them industry standard. Blackwood Global just announced a hiring drive for their new hub, Linda squeaked. They're offering 20% above market rate, full benefits and a signing bonus. Our guys are dropping their vests and walking across the street. Gavin collapsed into his chair. It was a raid, a systematic, brutal corporate raid. Julian Blackwood was dismantling his company brick by brick, employee by employee. Get me Richard Sterling, Gavin barked. We need to file an injunction. This is tortious interference. Mr. Sterling. He resigned this morning, sir, Linda whispered. He said he had a conflict of interest. What conflict? His firm was just retained by Blackwood Global. Gavin stared at the ceiling, feeling the walls closing in. He was alone. The lawyers were gone. The staff was leaving. The supply chain was broken. And the worst part? He couldn't shake the image of Eleanor in that car, the way she looked at him. Not with anger, but with pity. He grabbed his car keys. He needed to fix this. He needed to get to the one place where he could still exert influence. The Seattle Business Innovators Gala was tonight. Everyone who was anyone would be there. He would find investors. He would charm them. He would spin this as a restructuring phase. He was Gavin Mercer. He could talk his way out of anything. He didn't know that he was walking into his own execution. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was dripping with crystal and gold. It was the social event of the season, where the city's elite gathered to pat themselves on the back and donate tax-deductible millions to charity. Gavin arrived alone. He wore his tuxedo-like armor, projecting a confidence he didn't feel. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing tray and downed it in one gulp. He scanned the room. He saw the mayor. He saw the tech giants from Amazon and Microsoft. And then he saw the press. Good, he thought. I'll give an interview. Control the narrative. He smoothed his hair and began to mingle. Great year for Mercer Logistics, he lied to a potential investor near the shrimp cocktail. We're slimming down, cutting the fat, focusing on high-yield freight. I heard you lost the Western Hub, the investor said skeptically. Strategic withdrawal, Gavin smirked. We have better routes, innovative routes. Suddenly, the hum of conversation in the room died down. It was a ripple effect, starting at the grand staircase and washing over the crowd until the room was nearly silent. Heads turned. Gavin turned with them. At the top of the stairs stood Julian Blackwood. He looked regal in a midnight blue tuxedo. But no one was looking at Julian. They were looking at the woman on his arm. Elena. She was unrecognizable. Gone was the frizzy hair and the department store blazer. Her hair was sleek, cascading down her back in glossy waves. She wore a dress that was the color of fresh blood, a deep, vibrant crimson silk that hugged every curve she had hidden for years. It was elegant, striking, and undeniably dangerous. She held her head high, her posture perfect. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a queen. Gavin felt the champagne turn to acid in his stomach. He heard the whispers around him. Isn't that Gavin Mercer's ex-wife? My God, she's stunning. I heard she's the one advising Blackwood on the new sustainability initiative. Gavin couldn't help himself. Anger, jealousy, and desperation mixed into a toxic cocktail in his brain. He started walking toward the stairs. He had to break this spell. He had to remind her, and everyone else, that she was his failure, not Blackwood's success. Elena, Gavin called out, his voice too loud for the polite society gathering. Julian and Elena reached the bottom of the stairs. They stopped. The crowd parted, creating a circle around the trio. Gavin. Julian acknowledged him with a nod that was barely polite. What is this? A costume party? Gavin sneered, stepping into Elena's personal space. You look ridiculous, Elena. Who paid for the dress? Did you tell him about your credit score? Or does he just keep you around for decoration? The room gasped. It was a crude, classless attack. Elena didn't flinch. She let go of Julian's arm and took a step toward Gavin. She wasn't hiding behind the billionaire anymore. Hello, Gavin, she said, her voice clear and bell-like. It's funny you mention credit. I was actually just discussing finances with the board. You? Discussing finances? Gavin laughed, looking around for support from the crowd, but finding only stony faces. You can't even balance a checkbook without crying. Actually, Elena said, her smile turning sharp, I was the one who balanced your books for 7 years, Gavin, which is why I was uniquely qualified to accept the position of Director of Audit and Compliance for the Blackwood Foundation. Gavin blinked. Director of... What? The Foundation, Elena continued, her voice projecting to the silent room. Specifically, the department that oversees the ethical grants for local logistics companies. We were reviewing the applications today. We found some discrepancies in the Mercer Logistics file. Gavin's face went pale. What are you talking about? The Green Initiative grant you applied for? Elena tilted her head. The one worth $2 million. You claimed your fleet was 80% hybrid electric, but I know for a fact that you sold the hybrid trucks last year to cover your gambling debts in Vegas and replaced them with diesel clunkers from the 90s. I believe that's called fraud, Gavin. The silence in the room was deafening. The press photographers were snapping photos rapidly. You can't prove that, Gavin stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't have to, Eleanor said softly. The audit team is at your headquarters right now, along with the state regulators. I told them where to look. I told them about red line transport. I told them about the safety violations. I told them about the duplicate logs. Gavin took a step back, looking like he had been punched in the gut. You betrayed me. I was your husband. No, Gavin, Elena said, and for the first time, her voice broke with genuine emotion, not sadness, but the release of a heavy burden. You were my captor. You mocked me in a courtroom. You threw $20 in the mud and told me I was nothing. You thought because I was quiet, I was stupid. You thought because I was kind, I was weak. She took one step closer, the red dress swirling around her legs. I wasn't weak. I was tired. But I'm not tired anymore. Julian stepped forward then, placing a protective hand on the small of Elena's back. He looked at Gavin with icy finality. I think you should leave, Mr. Mercer, Julian said. Before the police arrive to escort you. They usually frown upon fraud suspects attending charity galas. Gavin looked around the room. The investors he wanted to charm were looking at him with disgust. The mayor was whispering to his security detail. The world he had built on lies and arrogance was crumbling in real time, under the chandelier light, destroyed by the woman he had underestimated. He turned and ran. He literally ran toward the exit, pushing past a waiter, the sound of his footsteps echoing the frantic beat of his heart. Elena watched him go. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just took a deep breath, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, terrifyingly free. Are you all right? Julian whispered, leaning down. Elena looked up at him. I will be. Can we get a drink? I think I earned it. I think you earned the whole bottle, Julian replied. But as the music started up again, and the gala resumed, a man in a trench coat was watching from the shadows of the balcony. He wasn't looking at Gavin. He was looking at Julian. He pulled out a phone. The Mercer distraction worked, the man whispered into the phone. Blackwood is focused on the girl. He's vulnerable. Initiate Phase 2. The air outside the Fairmont Hotel was crisp, but the flashing lights of police cruisers cut through the night, shattering the afterglow of Eleanor's victory. As Julian and Eleanor waited for the valet to bring the Rolls-Royce around, a black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. 4 men in windbreakers with FBI emblazoned on the back stepped out. They weren't looking for Gavin. They were walking straight toward Julian. Julian Blackwood? The lead agent barked, his hand resting near his holster. Julian stepped in front of Eleanor instinctively. I am. Is there a problem, Agent? You're under arrest for federal wire fraud and money laundering, the agent said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. We have evidence that Blackwood Global has been laundering cartel assets through the Western distribution hub for the past 6 months. The crowd of gala attendees, who had just been whispering about Elena's dress, now froze in shock. Cameras flashed wildly. That's impossible, Julian said, his voice cold and steady. I acquired that hub 4 days ago. Any prior activity is on the previous owner, Gavin Mercer. We know when you bought it, the agent countered, but we received an anonymous tip and a digital ledger 5 minutes ago. The ledger shows that you have been the silent partner funding Mercer Logistics for years. The transfers are signed with your digital key. It looks like you used Mercer as a front to keep your hands clean, Mr. Blackwood." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a frame-up, a master stroke of vengeance. Gavin knew he was going down, so he had decided to drag Julian down with him, using forged data to make it look like they were partners in crime. Julian was being handcuffed. The titan of industry looked powerless. He looked at Elena, his eyes conveying a single message: "Call my lawyer." But Elena didn't reach for her phone. She reached for the agent's tablet. "Wait," Elena said, stepping past the police line. Her voice wasn't shaking. "Agent, you said the transfers were signed with a digital key?" "Ma'am, step back," the agent warned. "I am the director of compliance for the accused's foundation." Elena lied smoothly, channeling every ounce of authority she had observed in Julian. "If you arrest him, based on a forged ledger, you will be facing a lawsuit that will bankrupt your department. Show me the transfer codes." The agent hesitated, but the sheer conviction in her voice made him pause. He turned the screen toward her. "It's encrypted, but the signature matches Blackwood's private server." Eleanor scanned the lines of code. To anyone else it looked like gibberish, numbers, letters, timestamps. But Eleanor had spent 10 years living with a man who thought he was smarter than he was. She had spent 10 years cleaning up his messes. Her eyes narrowed. She pointed to a recurring sequence in the transaction ID, 0912, TIF 0404. "There," Elena said, pointing a manicured finger. "That's not an encryption key generated by a server. That's a password." "What?" The agent frowned. 092, Elena recited. "That is September 12th, Gavin Mercer's birthday. And TIFF, that stands for Tiffany. She's the swimsuit model he's been seeing for 3 months. And 0404, that's the apartment number of his bachelor pad in Belltown." Eleanor looked up, meeting the agent's eyes. "Julian Blackwood uses a 256-bit rotating encryption generated by an AI security system," she explained, her voice rising so the press could hear. "He doesn't use his mistress's name as a hash key. Gavin Mercer does. He coded this ledger himself, probably in a panic tonight, trying to plant it on Julian's server to save his own skin. He's sloppy, Agent. He always has been." The agent looked at the screen, then at his partner. He tapped his earpiece. "Run a trace on the source of the anonymous tip, and check the IP address of the upload." A pause. The static on the radio crackled. "Dispatch says the upload came from a Motel 6 on the outskirts of Tacoma," the voice on the radio confirmed. "Room 102, registered to a G. Mercer." The agent's face fell. He looked at Julian, who was still in handcuffs, but now wearing a small, proud smile. "Uncuff him," the lead agent ordered. He turned to Eleanor. "Mum, I think we need to have a conversation with your ex-husband." The arrest of Gavin Mercer was televised live. He was dragged out of the motel room in his boxers, clutching a laptop, screaming that it was all a conspiracy. He looked disheveled, broken, and utterly alone. Elena watched it from the safety of Julian's living room, a mug of tea in her hands. The fire crackled in the hearth. Julian walked in, having finally finished with the lawyers and the press. He sat down next to her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You saved me," he said simply. "My lawyers would have taken days to unravel that code. You did it in 10 seconds. "I knew his patterns," Elena shrugged, though she felt a deep sense of pride. He was always predictable in his selfishness. Julian turned to her, his expression serious. He took her hand, the hand that had scrubbed floors, signed divorce papers, and pointed out the truth to the FBI. "Elena," he said, The job offer I made you at the gala, the director position. I was serious, but I think I aimed too low." "Too low?" she asked. "I don't need a director," Julian said. "I need a partner in the business and, if you're willing, in everything else." Elena looked at him. The billionaire who had opened her car door was now looking at her not as a savior, but as his equal. "I come with baggage, Julian," she whispered. "My ex-husband is going to prison. My name is all over the tabloids." "Let them talk," Julian said, leaning in. "They're just writing the prologue. We're about to write the rest of the book." He kissed her then. It wasn't a desperate movie star kiss. It was steady, firm, and full of promise. It was the kiss of a man who had finally found the one thing money couldn't buy: loyalty. Elena kissed him back, and for the first time in 10 years, she didn't feel like a supporting character in someone else's life. She was the lead. Gavin Mercer sat in a holding cell, staring at a concrete wall, wondering where it all went wrong. He would have plenty of time to think about it. 10 to 15 years, according to the sentencing guidelines. And outside, in the crisp Seattle air, Elena Vance stepped into the Rolls-Royce, not as a guest, but as the owner. She told the driver to take the scenic route. She had a lot of work to do, and for the first time she couldn't wait to get started. And that is how Gavin Mercer learned the hardest lesson of his life. Never underestimate the person who knows your secrets. He thought stripping Elena of her money would break her, but he forgot that her value never came from his bank account. It came from her resilience, her intelligence, and her loyalty. Gavin ended up with nothing but a prison sentence, while Elena didn't just find a billionaire. She found her voice, her power, and a partner who saw her as an equal. This story is a reminder to everyone watching. Your current situation is not your final destination. People might mock you, they might overlook you, and they might try to leave you behind in the rain. But if you hold on to your dignity, your Rolls-Royce moment is coming. So here is my question for you. Have you ever stayed loyal to someone who didn't appreciate you, only to realize later that you were the prize all along? Let me know your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss next week's story about a cheating husband who realizes he signed the wrong divorce papers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.